Hi, this is Congressman Tom Coles, another one of our weekly chats on what's going on in Washington, D.C. I want to begin with something that's not happening in Washington, D.C., but frankly, the problem is centered here, and that's the Biden border crisis that we're experiencing right now. You know, the reality is 2 months ago, the border was under control. President Biden, through a series of executive orders and changes in policy, lifted many of the safeguards that former President Trump had put into place to secure that border. He also stopped building the border wall. He also stopped deporting people who had crossed the border illegally for 100 days, including people, by the way, that had records as convicted criminals. Well, the outcome and the result of those actions was very predictable, and we're seeing them now. Basically, President Biden turned the green light on and invited millions of people to come across our borders. And believe me, millions of people are now beginning to consider that possibility that we're not thinking about it 3 months ago. And thousands of them are acting on that and coming across the border every single day. Our Border Patrol has been overwhelmed. We don't have sufficient facilities to house unaccompanied minors and people that are coming here. The population's largely being released into the country without any safeguards, frankly, without being tested for COVID-19, even though we know that about 1 out of every 10 of those illegal immigrants actually is bringing COVID-19 into the country. It is an amazingly bad example of executive leadership by President Biden. And this was all predictable. This is a crisis of his own making. And I think it's something Congress is going to be grappling with for quite some time. It's disappointing to watch the administration deny that there is a crisis. As a matter of fact, if you follow the media, they'll talk about a challenge, or they'll try to blame President Trump or the last administration. The reality is the border was under control when President Biden took office. It's out of control now that he's been in office essentially 2 months. So I think they ought to step up to the plate, take responsibility, and start listening to people that secured the border in the past and following common sense measures to discourage and prevent illegal immigration into our country. And by the way, that illegal immigration comes not with just people flooding into the country, but with human traffickers and drugs as well, both of which are reaching unprecedented numbers along the entire southern border. So it is an example of extraordinarily bad judgment by the president. He and his administration need to move quickly to correct that problem. Here in Washington, D.C., it's been a disappointing week in many ways. We've had some really bad bills. We had a couple of bills on immigration. Those bills, frankly, would have legalized millions of people that are here illegally. Some of those people ought to be legalized, but it needs to be done in ways that don't encourage other people to keep coming. It needs to be coupled with more security on the border, and we need to not allow people to exploit these things, and some of these bills did that. So while they passed, I don't think they're likely to get through the Senate, certainly as long as the current border crisis is underway. We also had a bill to prevent Medicare and Medicaid cuts. Those cuts should have never happened in the first place. They were triggered by the irresponsible spending in the last reconciliation or COVID-19 relief bill. There's more than enough money in those bills, by the way, that's being wasted to offset any cuts. The legislation passed, and I think will probably pass the United States Senate. But again, this is just another example of Democrats putting things on the credit card rather than actually dealing with the problem and offsetting cuts with unnecessary spending that could have been directed to sort of plug the holes in the Medicare budget, if you will. There was also an important piece of legislation which I supported, but which I have some concerns about the manner in which it's written, and that's the Violence Against Women Act. I've been a strong supporter of that legislation ever since I got into Congress. We reauthorize it every 5 years. It provides really critical support for battered women's shelters, for law enforcement dealing with domestic violence and sexual assault, for the victims of those horrific crimes. It also has expanded powers amongst Native American nations so that they can actually deal with the horrific problem of rape and domestic violence on Indian reservations. I worked hard to get those measures into the bill several years ago. I'm proud to say the current reauthorization actually expands those measures. So those are the good things in the bill. Unfortunately, Democrats decided to couple it with some gun control measures and frankly some questionable decisions that would force, for instance, battered women's shelters to accept transgender males. Now, I don't think that's a policy we should be making the decision on. I think each of these shelters should decide what kind of population they are best suited to house. And I particularly think we need to be careful about infringing on the shelters operated by religious organizations and groups that want to operate shelters according to their beliefs. Look, they're providing a public service and a place for women in crisis to go. We don't need to tell them how to do their business. Some of that is in this bill. I don't expect it to stay in this bill. Quite frankly, the Democrats did the same thing 2 years ago, and they weren't able to get the bill through the Senate. It'll require 60 votes there. I think the same problem will happen again. The sad thing is, because they've overreached, the good things in the bill won't happen either, and we'll probably end up, just continuing the status quo, not providing the additional support that the legislation as written would provide if we would put it forward legislatively in a form that could pass both houses and be genuinely bipartisan. I made those points on the floor and in committee to my Democratic colleagues, but look, at the end of the day, I'm going to always be working to provide protections for women and children in vulnerable situations. I'm going to always be on the side that opposes domestic violence and gives people in those horrific situations an opportunity to escape them and to go into secure environments. And I'm going to always be for providing law enforcement and particularly tribal nations with the ability to deal with these problems. So we're going to keep working this, and hopefully sooner or later common sense will prevail and we'll move on. Again, we have a lot of disappointing things this week where I think the Democratic majority, which is a narrow one, is overreaching. Now, that majority is also focused on trying to expand itself and do so in a very unethical way. There was an election in Iowa that was the closest election that I'm aware of in modern American congressional history. But the winner was a Republican, Marionette Miller Meeks, by 6 votes. She won the count, she won the recount, she won the court cases, and she's been certified as the member from that district by the Iowa election authorities. However, under the Constitution, the final arbiter of the membership of Congress is Congress itself. We have the right to exclude people and literally change election outcomes if there's a protest filed. In this case, the losing candidate filed a protest. Now, that candidate, by the way, wouldn't go into the court system in her own state and actually risk her case in front of her fellow Iowans. She came here and put it in front of a committee, the administration committee, where the Democrats have a 2-to-1 majority, 6 Democrats to 3 Republicans. They're looking at this election now. It would be a travesty if Representative Meeks, who's already, by the way, been sworn into Congress, been up here doing her job, put a very important piece of legislation on the floor last week, a very important provision that would have forced the Biden administration to actually test illegal immigrants for COVID-19 before releasing them. She's doing her job, and she shouldn't have to worry about being removed in a partisan move by Speaker Pelosi. And rest assured that if she is removed, it will be Speaker Pelosi that removed her, because Speaker Pelosi appoints every one of those 6 Democrats to the House Administration Committee. So that's one we're watching. I think every Republican member in the House is watching. We intend to protect our colleague who won the election fair and square, and hopefully over time our Democratic colleagues will see it that way as well and not go through with any effort or support any effort to deny Representative Meeks her seat. Let me end on a little more hopeful note. It's National Reading Month this month, and I would encourage you to do some reading. We have a long list of what we think are excellent suggestions for you in our Book of the Month, so to speak, club, where I say what I happen to be reading on a monthly basis, and check that out. I think you'll find a lot of good titles. More importantly, whatever it is that you enjoy, whether it's history, whether it's science, whether it's literature, whether it's poetry, take time to read. It's one of God's great gifts to us, and one of you are guaranteed. And fortunately, you live in a country where you can read just about anything you want to read. So I would urge you to take the opportunity. And for those of you that are engaged in education, who have given all of us the precious ability to read, our teachers and our professors, I just want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. I remember learning to read as a child changed my life. One of the things I'm proudest of about my son is he's a teacher in the public school system, and he helps young men and women learn how to read and learn how to develop academically. Again, it's a great gift, but doesn't end when school's over. So for those of you like me that are sort of beyond your formal schooling, you can continue to learn, you can continue to enrich your life, and you can continue to enjoy the wisdom of the ages. Take time, pick up a book, and read it.